The Litvinenko affair. In November 2006, London became the stage for one of the most shocking intelligence assassinations in modern European history. The victim was Alexander Litvinenko, a former FSB officer who had defected to the West and openly accused the Kremlin of corruption and criminal ties. On November 1st, Litvinenko met with two former Russian agents, Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun, at the Millennium Hotel. Shortly afterward, he fell gravely ill. Doctors were unable to identify the cause until it was too late. The poison was polonium-210, one of the rarest and deadliest radioactive substances in existence, slipped into his tea. Litvinenko himself accused Vladimir Putin of ordering the attack. He died on November 23rd, and investigators discovered radioactive traces across London, from hotel rooms to airplane seats. The trail made clear that this was not an amateur attempt, but a state-level operation involving nuclear material. A British public inquiry later concluded that the killing was carried out by the FSB with the likely approval of Putin. In 2021, the European Court of Human Rights also ruled that Russia was responsible. The Litvinenko case sent a powerful message. Even after the Cold War, Russian intelligence was willing to use nuclear poison in the heart of London to silence a critic. For Europe, it was a warning. Moscow's reach extended far beyond its borders, and the old spy games were far from over. The Skripal poisoning. In March 2018, another attack shook the United Kingdom. This time, the target was Sergei Skripal, a former GRU officer who had spied for British intelligence before being exchanged in a spy swap years earlier. He had settled in the quiet city of Salisbury with his daughter Yulia. On March 4th, both were found unconscious on a park bench. Investigators discovered they had been poisoned with Novichok, a Soviet-developed nerve agent considered one of the deadliest chemical weapons in existence. The toxin had been applied to the door handle of Skripal's home. The attack triggered a massive police and military operation. Traces of Novichok were found across the city, including in restaurants and public areas. A British citizen, Dawn Sturgis, later died after accidentally coming into contact with a discarded container used in the operation. British authorities identified the suspects as two GRU officers traveling under false identities, Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Bushirov. Surveillance footage and travel records tied them directly to the operation. The government concluded that the attack had been carried out on the orders of the Russian state. The political fallout was immediate. Dozens of Russian diplomats were expelled from the UK and across Europe in a coordinated response. The incident revived Cold War tensions, demonstrating that Moscow was willing to use chemical weapons on NATO soil to pursue its enemies. The Skripal case showed Europe that the Litvinenko affair had not been an isolated event. It was part of a broader pattern. Russian intelligence operations using extraordinary methods to eliminate critics and defectors abroad, regardless of the risks. The Berlin hit. On August 23, 2019, broad daylight in Berlin's Kleiner Tiergarten Park turned into the scene of another Russian-linked killing. The victim was Zelimkhan Kangashvili, a Georgian of Chechen origin who had fought against Russian forces in the Second Chechen War. After surviving previous assassination attempts in Georgia, he had sought asylum in Germany. While walking through the park, he was approached by a cyclist who shot him in the head with a silenced pistol. The attacker tried to flee but was quickly caught by German police. He carried a Russian passport under the name Vadim Sokolov, which later turned out to be an alias linked to Russian security services. German prosecutors concluded that the murder had been carried out on behalf of the Russian state. The operation was precise, professional, and consistent with past Russian intelligence actions against perceived enemies abroad. The fallout was severe. Germany expelled Russian diplomats and openly accused Moscow of orchestrating the assassination. For Berlin, this was not just a crime, but a direct attack on German sovereignty. The Kangashvili case reinforced a pattern already visible after Litvinenko and Skripal. Across Europe, individuals who had opposed Russia, whether defectors, dissidents, or former fighters, were being eliminated in public spaces with little regard for political consequences. The Glushkov murder. In March 2018, just days after the Skripal poisoning, another Russian exile was found dead in London. Nikolai Glushkov, a former deputy director of the airline Aeroflot and a known critic of Vladimir Putin, was discovered at his home with marks on his neck. British investigators quickly ruled out natural causes. The injuries were consistent with strangulation, and the coroner concluded that Glushkov had been unlawfully killed. He had been living in the UK since being granted political asylum, following fraud charges in Russia that he insisted were politically motivated. Glushkov had close ties to other prominent Kremlin critics. including Boris Berezovsky, another oligarch who had died under mysterious circumstances in Britain in 2013. His murder deepened concerns that a shadow campaign was underway to eliminate Russian dissidents and oligarchs who had fallen out with the Kremlin. Although no suspects were charged, the timing of Glushkov's death, so soon after the Skripal attack, raised suspicions of a coordinated message from Moscow. Once again, Europe was reminded that exile did not guarantee safety. The Voronenkov assassination. On March 23, 2017, former Russian lawmaker Denis Voronenkov was gunned down in broad daylight outside a hotel in Kiev. Once a member of the Russian State Duma, Voronenkov had broken with the Kremlin, fled to Ukraine, and become an outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin and Russian policy in Crimea. As he walked toward the Premier Palace Hotel with a bodyguard, a gunman approached and opened fire. Voronenkov was killed instantly, though his bodyguard managed to shoot and wound the attacker. The assailant later died of his injuries. Ukrainian authorities described the murder as a political assassination orchestrated by Russia. President Petro Poroshenko declared that it was an act of state terrorism by Russia, designed to silence a defector who had insider knowledge of Kremlin politics. For Moscow, Voronenkov had become a liability. He had not only defected but also testified against former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, a close ally of Putin. His death sent a clear message to other defectors. Exile would not protect them. The killing in Kiev showed that Russian intelligence operations in Europe were not limited to London or Berlin. They extended deep into Ukraine, blending organized crime tactics with state intelligence objectives. The Navalny poisoning. In August 2020, Russia's most prominent opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, boarded a flight from Tomsk to Moscow. Midway through the journey, he collapsed in agony. The plane made an emergency landing in Omsk, where Navalny was hospitalized in critical condition. Doctors in Russia hesitated to confirm poisoning, but after international pressure, Navalny was flown to Berlin for treatment. German specialists quickly identified the culprit, Novichok, the same Soviet-developed nerve agent used in the Skripal case. The evidence pointed unmistakably to a state-sponsored attack. Investigators from Bellingcat, together with German and other European journalists, uncovered that a team of FSB operatives had been shadowing Navalny for years. They linked phone records, travel logs, and covert communications directly to the plot. In a stunning twist, Navalny himself managed to trick one of the agents into admitting over the phone that the poison had been smeared onto his underwear. The fallout was immediate. The European Union and the United States imposed fresh sanctions on Russia, accusing the Kremlin of deploying chemical weapons against a political opponent. Moscow rejected the charges, brushing them off as Russophobia. Navalny pulled through, but the attempt did not silence him or his supporters. Instead, it exposed just how far Russian intelligence was willing to go, even in peacetime, to eliminate a critic who had become a global symbol of resistance. The oligarch deaths. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, a disturbing pattern has emerged. A series of wealthy Russian businessmen and energy executives have been found dead in Europe under mysterious circumstances. Official reports often listed them as suicides or accidents, but the similarities raised suspicions of something far more coordinated. Several oligarchs with ties to Gazprom and Lukoil were discovered hanged in their homes, sometimes alongside family members. Others were reported to have fallen from windows or died in unusual accidents abroad. In many cases, the victims had insider knowledge of Russia's energy sector and its financial networks in Europe. Spanish police investigated the deaths of Sergei Protosenya and his family near Barcelona, initially calling it a murder-suicide, but later questioning inconsistencies. In London, the death of Mikhail Watford, a Ukrainian-born oligarch with Russian business links, was also treated as suspicious. Across Europe, similar cases appeared. Sudden deaths, quick explanations, and unanswered questions. While none of these incidents have been officially tied to Russian intelligence, analysts and journalists point to a familiar pattern. In past decades, Russian services used poison, bullets, and silenced pistols. Now, many believe the message is being delivered through staged suicides and accidents. For Europe, the wave of oligarch deaths is more than a series of tragedies. It is a reminder that Russia's secret wars are not confined to dissidents and defectors. They also extend to billionaires whose fortunes and secrets could threaten the Kremlin.